just under 10 minutes to have this particular conversation on this identity crisis. I'm sure I'm the first person to bring up identity today. But jokes aside, identity is the topic of 2021. I think it was the topic of 2020. It's going to be the topic of next year and just the years moving forward. But there's a lot of emotion around this topic, and I think you can slice this conversation many different ways. So I just want to set the table on how I'm intending to approach this first. The focus is really going to be more on the higher level questions you might be asking yourself that go beyond just the solutions that are available to replace cookies, but what are additional things you want to be thinking about foundationally that this crisis has brought to the forefront. So with that, I'll make this really obvious point. The industry is facing an identity crisis. So what do I mean when I say that? So like I said, maybe moments earlier, that if you're thinking about cookies and all the different implications associated with that, I'd have more than 2 points. But specifically as it relates to identity, I think this is a very simplistic way of thinking of 2 components. One, how do we identify audiences moving into the future in ways that are different than how we've done it to date? And then how do we identify what advertising is? What is meaningful advertising? What is that going to look like moving into the future? So just to take a step back and look at some of what has been taking place in the larger landscape, what is the future of identifiers? And I think right now, this is where we're looking at the crumbling of a foundation that we have so long relied on. And now every day we're biting our nails, looking at the next thing that's going to take effect and impact the way that we're able to target audiences that are meaningful to us and that we've been relying on tactically speaking. So hopefully this is just a quick high-level look at some things that many folks listening right now are familiar with, that there is this imminent loss of third-party cookies to take place. And the expectation is that a lot of that is going to be lost next year now, I think is the latest update in terms of sometime early 2022. And that loss of cookies is also having an impact on a reduction of other ad signals that are out there, specifically probabilistic IDs, which are a part of developing audiences. And then just alongside that, I think there's been so much heat on this conversation, mobile IDs. There's impact associated with IDFA and Apple ID. There's been no shortage of conversation around the updates for iOS 14 and what that is going to mean for putting more control in the hands of phone users and the greater likelihood and the reduced capacity to be able to target in ways that, again, we've historically relied on, but now specifically on mobile devices. And then finally, this growth of regulation. At this moment in time, what we've really seen are, I think, these 3 big pieces: GDPR to regulate and protect residents in the EU, and then for California residents, CCPA and CPRA, which was recently passed, but the responsibility of ensuring that advertisers and brands are upholding what CPRA demands is something that a lot of brands and advertisers and businesses are working hard to figure out right now. So speaking of regulation, this is one of those survey points that oftentimes people will bring up. So 71% of respondents in this particular survey said they would like to see the government reform how companies treat their data. I think if you crossed off government and said, see publishers reform how companies are treating data, if you were to cross it out and write tech stacks or tech platforms, the expectation would consistently be there. Any customer is feeling shorthanded in terms of understanding how their data is being collected and how it's being subsequently transmitted to other parties. So no surprise seeing that there. But in terms of higher level impact, and not just who is impacted as written on this slide, but also who are all the players that are impacting this identity crisis. We have marketers who are obviously impacted because of the limitations that are going to take place, impacting the way that they target, the way that they're able to measure their attribution solutions. So that's where really the core of the crisis is stemming from. But then who are the other pieces of the, or what are rather the other pieces of the pie? So we've got consumers and a call for more privacy and more regulative control so that people actually know what's happening with their data. And I think if anything, more people who fall into the advocacy space and or want to know what's happening with their data, they're getting more educated and they're more curious about what can be done. So I think advocacy work is going to continue to flourish, and that's going to result in more regulation. So that next point related to regulation, I think we've really just hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is going to be coming down the pike. So more to come there. So something for advertisers and brands to really think about. And then, of course, what we're seeing with browsers, that's really the big point of concern or contention right now, is that Google imminently via Chrome is going to do away with third-party cookies, which is really going to be that end game moment in terms of reliance on cookies. And then the impact in the ad tech and publisher space. So many different types of tactics and inventory that we like to cultivate and categorize are going to be impacted in terms of the way that we can target effectively. So I think this is an interesting stat. 30% estimated percent of impressions are already unreachable due to existing privacy changes. This is expected to increase 2 to 3 times over the next year, given impending changes. So this is kind of that doom and gloom point that I think is making so many of us in the marketing and advertising space so uncomfortable. Unreachable impressions that we've historically relied on. How are we expecting to move into a world where we're going to be dealing without them? And so one point to mention is that we really have to do away with this expectation that we can rely on unhealthy solutions of the past. Things that are going to violate many of these privacy laws. We can't continue to rely on them, but instead we need to move into a world where we are looking at the identity solutions that are considering all this privacy regulation that's out there and optimizes for giving people control over their data, but also make sure that we're just following regulative expectations. And as far as where we can go from here, where can we go from here today? There are a variety of different solutions in addition to some of those points I made on the previous slide, as far as identity solutions to look towards and consider and beta test as soon as you can, but also other things that aren't as far of a leap include just leveraging machine learning, ingesting more types of first-party data and thinking about how you can action on those, and then also not losing sight of the importance of brand recognition, getting people into the top of that sales loop, finding those new customers, and or just engaging with existing customers. Incorporating contextual targeting and semantic targeting. I think too often people will downplay the importance of it. And then adapting performance tracking as well. You have to amend your expectations around what it is that can be done in this future that we're moving into. And I don't think there's going to ever be an apples to apples comparison to what we've been able to achieve in the past with cookies. So just managing our own expectations and understanding what it is that we can achieve. So 10 minutes blows by very quickly, but just wanted to share this high level look. And just in closing, I also wanted to mention that there are additional tech solutions that are out there that need to be considered in addition to thinking about tactical considerations. We're really obsessed with how do we replicate what we can do from a targeting perspective. We also need to be thinking about everything else that's in our tech stack as well. So I'll leave it there because we're already 10 minutes in. Thanks everyone, and looking forward to the rest of the afternoon.
Okay, so thank you very much, Noor. Those were some really great insights and really well-designed deck too. As somebody who often designs decks, I am always appreciative of a well-designed deck. I just wanted to throw in a little bit of TV rev knowledge in there. We've done a lot of stuff around privacy and identity in the TV industry. One of the interesting things is with television, people don't really care that what they're watching. If anything, they sort of feel like, okay, on digital, they track my entire life. So if somebody knows the shows I'm watching, maybe they won't cancel them, or maybe I'll actually get better recommendations. Where it all falls apart is then when you explain the whole process and you get to the part of, and then they're able to see if the ad was effective because they have your credit card data. And that's when people freak out. They're like, oh my God, what do you mean they track my credit card data? And even if you sort of, and this is people outside of the industry, of course, and then once you explain, okay, well, it's anonymized and all. So we think there's good, once Congress kind of figures this out, because Congress is always a few steps behind, that could become a real issue over the next few years. The fact that they're actually able to track location and credit card data, and off of ad serve. So just something to keep a heads up on. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. We only have 2 sessions left in our programming today, so be sure to stay tuned and ask our speakers any questions you may have. But right now, I want you to please join me in welcoming our next session to the virtual stage. We are very excited to have Christine Lustig,